We got a few.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Moore County Board of Education special called meeting for today, Monday, August 26th, the first day of school. Lots of excitement out there. It's been a busy day and an exciting day for our students and for our staff. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. We have two important items on the agenda today. Dr. Grimsey, do you want to lead us off with the first
And
one?
Madam Chair, I'll invite Mr. Barath to come forward and he will introduce whoever it is that's going to join him.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Grimsey. Good afternoon.
Hey.
Beautiful weather for a first day of school.
Yes.
Tremendous. But today, here to talk to you about the results of the environmental report phase 2 test that was performed at the Aberdeen school site. To lead into the introduction to this, Richard Brown, a professional engineer with Building and Earth, will come up and present the findings of it to you. But let me start off by reminding the board where we were and why we're here today. Building and Earth Sciences submitted their phase 1 report in September 11, 2015. This was for the new site in Aberdeen that the board was about to acquire. Following the release of the report, there were concerns expressed by a few citizens as to the potential risk to the site from the nearby Superfund cleanup sites. In response to those concerns that were expressed, an addendum from Building and Earth was issued on May 23, 2017, and that addendum further clarified that there was not a recognized environmental condition out there. You may hear that phrase again in the report, referred to as a RBC or a REC. Now, after the release of the addendum, there were again some additional concerns stated by a few citizens about the site and the hazard to the children and staff that would be occupying the school. Now, although again the report clearly identified that there were not a need for a REC on the site, and back in July, Dr. Grimsey authorized a phase 2 assessment to be performed at the school site and to put to rest any concerns that may be expressed by any of the citizens or any concerns that we as staff must address. So Building and Earth was immediately contacted to perform this work. Over the past month and a half, they have completed their diligence out there, and I will now invite Richard Brown to come and present his findings.
Dr. Grimsey, board members, thank you for having me. This PowerPoint presentation will just be a synopsis. I believe you've had a chance to look at the report. I'm going to hit the highlights, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. This is the purpose of our phase 2 environmental site assessment. The two well-known pesticide sites, which are only 2 of 5 in this region, known as collectively as the Aberdeen pesticide dumps. But there was a site north of the school site called the Fairway 6, and a site south of the site called the McIver dump. And also show 2 other sites on this slide, well away from the school site, actually closer to downtown Aberdeen, I believe. The yellow arrows indicate the documented direction of groundwater flow from all of the studies that were done for these Superfund cleanup sites. And Superfund, as you may know, is just another word, is a colloquialism for a national priority list. The EPA has lists of sites, they're established priorities for cleanup from hazardous wastes, and NPL sites or Superfund sites. If you hear either one of those mean it's basically the same. There's a fifth site that I think is even further east of these four that are shown on this map. Of particular note, and part of the reason that we established or formed the opinion that there was no recognized environmental conditions associated with these NPL sites is, again, the direction of groundwater flow, because you have to have a suspicion or reason to believe that an off-site contaminant can reach your subject property or the school site in this case. And the white line here, I'll show you on the next slide, indicates a slice through the geology of this region, and I'll show you a profile of that site. The Aberdeen, or the Fairway 6 site on the left is north of the school site, and the school site is represented by that vertical line in the center with an approximate elevation of 450 feet. The Fairway 6 site is approximately 430 to 435 feet above sea level, so it's 15 to 20 feet below the school site, with groundwater flowing away from the school site. The McIver site is even further below the school site, and its direction of groundwater flow is not towards the site, but could be construed as towards the site because it's south and the groundwater flow is to the northeast. But if you notice that large dip in between the McIver site and the school site, that's a tributary to, I think, Little Aberdeen Creek, and it forms what we call an aquatic barrier to contaminants crossing over. Plus, it's so much further below the school site that, in our opinion, it could not contribute to any contamination at the school site. This is to reiterate what John Barath said. The earlier studies and an addendum to our study, we formed the opinion based on principles in the study that there was no recognized environmental conditions. And RECs are defined in an ASTM, an American Society of Testing Materials standard, and this definition comes straight from that standard. And the standard was developed from laws that were passed by Congress back in the 70s, I believe. I'm not sure exactly when the Superfund laws passed. I don't have that memorized, but the ASTM standard follows procedures that were established by Congress. And again, the dates of the two earlier studies are the study and the addendum, the phase 1 and the addendum, and it was building in our opinion that the findings did not constitute a recognized environmental condition. Nonetheless, the board, as John said, about 6 weeks ago, asked us to go ahead and proceed with the phase 2. These are just the typical steps involved in a phase 2 from a separate ASTM. A phase 1 and a phase 2 each have their own defined procedures. We established a conceptual site model and sampling plan, and the analytes, or the things that we were going to test for, were exactly the same analytes that had been tested for over and over at both the McIver and the Fairway 6 site. We wanted to see if we could find any of those contaminants or anything on the school site. Surface samples, and we did 8 samples, and there'll be a drawing showing where the samples were taken. But we elected to, again, this is looking at the risk to, potential risk to the students. We selected areas around the school where they would have the highest risk of exposure, the playgrounds that were shown on the drawings, near a walking track, near the flagpole, and near the drop-off zone. So we looked at sites where the highest risk of exposure may exist. And we also, as a matter of the course, sampled the groundwater. And the groundwater in this case shown in our geotechnical investigation is not part of an aquifer, but it's a trapped layer of water above a clay layer that's on the site. So it's not an aquifer. These are the 6 locations that or 8 locations, and at, pointer doesn't work, but at boring location B1, that's where one of the monitoring wells was drilled all the way to groundwater. B2 was just a boring by itself to 10 feet. B3 was a boring by itself. The second well was done at boring location B4, and then the third well was done at boring location B7. And because this drawing, in order to be more presentable on the PowerPoint slide, is turned 90 degrees to the west, north is to your left, and the McIver site would be located off the right side to the east or to the south.
So each one of those different locations, you actually drill down, one you said 10 feet,
Yeah.
others you drill down further until you hit water, you said?
Yes.
For each one of those different
The
sites?
TMW, or temporary monitoring well, are the ones that where we drilled all the way till we found
Okay.
a water layer. And if it just has a indication with a B, then those were the 10-foot samples where we just
Okay.
sampled the soil. We sampled the soil at all 8 boring locations, but we sampled water at 3. Documented the groundwater levels at the 3 wells. You know, it's hard to establish exactly where the water level is while you're doing the sampling. So when you encounter groundwater, generally you might be a little bit lower than where the water would reach equilibrium. So you wait 24 hours to allow the water in the temporary well to reach equilibrium, and the shallower depths would be the depth where we measured the groundwater 24 hours after the wells were established. I'll back up one slide just so you can see. So TMW2, which is at the top of the slab or on the east part of the site, is where the water was the shallowest, which was 16 feet. At the other 2 locations, it was 40 and 46 feet. Now, when we tested for the various analytes, one of the slides said VOCs, or volatile organic compounds. We tested for metals, which there are 8 commonly tested for metals. They're called heavy metals, and most of those showed up in one of these borings, or all the samples. The metals did, that is. But the volatile organic compounds, semi-volatile organic compounds, and then the pesticides that we tested for, showed up in none but 2 of the water samples. There were none in any soil samples, but I'll go through the rest of these results. But on this slide and the subsequent slides, I broke these down two borings per page. But I have the analyte, which would be what was tested for. But in addition to the ones shown, for example, on B3, barium, chromium, copper, iron, lead, manganese, acetone, and 2-butanone, first 6 are metals, and those were tested for a test called RCRA metals. But the lab result shows how many milligrams per kilogram were detected in the soil samples that we took. The next column is the reporting detection limit. That's how accurate, or that's the lowest level that the tests, which are industry standards, can detect. So they can detect down to 0.5 milligrams per kilogram of barium in a soil sample. And they did find 10.9 in this case on B3. But the next column shows the North Carolina cleanup standards for barium in a soil at a residential site. And residential sites and schools and playgrounds all have the same standard. So North Carolina allows up to 3,100 milligrams per kilogram before they determine that an action needs to be taken to clean it up. And EPA screening levels, we compared it to North Carolina standards and EPA standards. And North Carolina's screening levels were even, or EPA screening levels were even higher for this analyte. And lastly, we found a source from the North Carolina Department of Environmental and Natural Resources that listed the median and range of soil concentrations, but we will only find these for metals because you don't expect to find pesticides or volatile organic compounds. Those are all, VOCs and SVOCs are all components or constituents of petroleum products. So from gasoline spills, diesel spills, any other petroleum product, that's usually when you encounter VOCs and SVOCs. But we tested for those anyway because they were being tested for at the NPL sites.
Can I pause for just a moment, just so I understand how to read this table?
Yes,
So the first one, the analyte itself, you tested for more analytes than what show up here, is that correct?
we tested the tests that were ordered, yes. Short answer, yes, we did.
And do you know
Over
about how many?
150.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask.
Over 150 analytes were tested for. Most of them fall in the SVOC or VOC category. There are dozens and dozens or scores of different compounds that petroleum products break down into that can be tested for.
So if they did not reach the detecting limit of your tests, they don't show up here, which
Right.
means all the ones that you tested that don't show up here did not even
Yes, ma'am,
trigger
that's correct.
your test to pick them up.
In the
Okay.
appendix, we put the full
Right.
test report, and the laboratory detected none of the other potential analytes that were there. They analyzed the samples for scores of compounds, but these are the only ones that showed up.
Okay. Thank you.
And moving on, I said for instance, barium, the median amount of barium that you may find in a North Carolina soil is 580 milligrams per kilogram. And the range over hundreds of tests that were performed by the North Carolina Department of Environmental and Natural Resources was between 10 and 5,000. So, if you got to 5,000, you would be above the North Carolina cleanup standards, but in our case, we had 10.9. These are the analytes that were detected in B5 and 6. And you do see, like I said, you do see acetone, 2-butanone in B6. You see isopropyl-toluene, benzene, acetone, 2-butanone, and toluene in B06, or B5 and 6. Those are VOCs, volatile organic compounds, that come from petroleum products, but they're in trace amounts. Well below cleanup standards. On a construction site or anywhere you have a vehicle, you may encounter VOCs. I'm not saying that's where these came from because we were not able to determine the source of any of these analytes, but they are well below cleanup standards. And then we detected analytes in B7 and 8. And again, trace amounts of VOCs and levels of metals that are consistent with what you might find in the environment.
And when you say that, is it, if you went to any home or any business in any community, this would be the medium that you would get in North Carolina? Is that what that medium
Yes.
and range would be?
Yes, ma'am. The report was from the NCDENR.
So not just necessarily the location, because like me, living out in rural, I could find the exact same thing
You could
out
find,
in
yes,
my
they're
area?
naturally occurring. Most of
Okay.
these are naturally occurring in the soils in North Carolina and other states.
Okay,
And they're well below, lead, for instance, B7 had 1.4 milligrams per kilogram. Lead is a known health hazard, but the EPA and the North Carolina cleanup standards are much higher than what we detected. And to summarize, the metals in the soil samples are consistent with naturally occurring levels, and we did observe trace amounts of VOCs in 5 of the 8 borings. All of which were below North Carolina cleanup standards and EPA screening levels. And these are the lab results of the 3 water samples that were tested. And if you notice, there's some bold numbers on there, and those are cases where what we found in the lab were above the reporting limit or above the North Carolina groundwater standards. But in TMW01, that groundwater that we measured again was 16 feet below the surface, and in TMW03, it was 46 feet or 40 feet below the surface. And it most likely got to the groundwater or the water in there from being washed down, from water washing the soil particles down through, or the metals down through the soil. But it's not a risk of exposure because of its depth. And to summarize the water sample lab results. And did mention, or we've mentioned it, but there were trace amounts of a compound called 4,4-DDD in 2 of the water samples, both well below the North Carolina groundwater quality standards, less than, I think in TMW02, we're looking at about 7% of what, only 7% of what the North Carolina cleanup standards are, and about 19% in TMW03 of what North Carolina would allow for groundwater. And of note, documented tests and studies have shown that the primary source of exposure to DDD is ingestion of food in land grown that still has DDD at the surface where the plants can absorb it.
So you're looking for those in terms of ingestion with water or plants, and how is and there is no groundwater that's being used for irrigation at this site, is that correct, Mr. Brath? And it's all being, we all have sewer being pulled in for that.
We are using public water source. We're not using any water wells on the site.
Mr. Brown, to the
Yes.
best of your knowledge, has a Phase 2 study been run anywhere else in Aberdeen?
There have been multiple studies at each of the individual NPL sites, and they're still being monitored to this date. I believe they have to report back to the EPA every 5 years they're still being monitored. They still have wells at Fairway 6. I believe they still have wells at the McIver dump site. And these sites are under ongoing monitoring. And the state of North Carolina issues a report every 5 years on the status. The levels of contaminants of those sites have been declining based on what I've read. They have remediation methods that they're using, But those sites are being studied and continuously tested.
Thank you.
And our conclusion of, the conclusion of our Phase 2 report, based on these facts, there was no evidence of pesticides, carbaryl, and I had to look that up. That's 7 dust, or 7. That's a pesticide, but carbaryl is also being tested for at the NPL sites. So again, we mirrored our study, our analytes on what they were testing for at the NPL sites. But there were no pesticides, carbaryl, or semi-volatile organic compounds in any of the soil samples. The concentration of metals in the soil samples were below the North Carolina cleanup standards, as well as EPA regional screening levels. Concentration of metals were consistent with the median and range of soil concentrations from the NCDENR. Concentrations of VOCs, volatile organic compounds, in the B3, 5, 6, 7, and 8 were well below the North Carolina cleanup standards. And the concentration of 4,4-DDD and TMW2 and 3 were below the North Carolina groundwater quality standards, as well as the EPA maximum contaminant level. And the fact that the groundwater was encountered more than 16 feet below ground surface in TMW02 and 45 feet in TMW03, and the risk of ingestion is extremely low. I can't stand here. There's no way that I'm aware of that they could ingest groundwater that's 15 feet below the surface. But it is our opinion that, based on these facts, that the results do not pose a significant environmental or health risk. And we recommend no further investigation of the subject property, as stated in our report. Just because of the contaminants that were detected, we don't recommend to use the groundwater for irrigation or drinking sources. And as Mr. Barath said, that's not the case. Thank you.
Board members, are there any questions? I just have 3 quick questions, just for clarification. Or is the school being built on an MPL site or a Superfund site?
It is not.
Did the Phase 1 indicate the need for a Phase 2 study?
It did not.
Does the Phase 2 study recommend any need for further clarification or studies?
It does not.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have some comments I'd like to make.
Mr. Dennison.
We have done our due diligence regarding environmental conditions for the new Aberdeen Elementary School property. In Phase 1, the conclusions were, I quote, "The assessment has revealed no evidence of recognized environmental conditions in connection with the property," unquote. Phase 2 conclusion, quote, "It is our opinion that the results do not pose significant environmental risk," unquote. Quote, "We recommend further investigation of the we recommend no further investigation of the property. However, we do not recommend the groundwater be used as drinking water source for irrigation purposes on the subject property," unquote. And I agree with that statement 100%, but we never had any plans to use groundwater for irrigation or as a drinking source. And if the public has further questions regarding the property, I invite them to at least read the first 17 pages of the Phase 2 report. The entire report will be available online if you want to look at all 663 pages. Safety and security are my number one concern for my 12,700 children, and I am confident those attending the new Aberdeen Elementary School will be safe and secure. And I know many of you are looking for assurances that there will never be a problem, but can anyone guarantee what will or will not happen in the future? Decisions can only be made on the specific information at a given point in time, and Building and Earth has indicated in their professional opinion that no further investigation is needed. Can you guarantee for yourself what will happen tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, or 10 years from now? If not, then how will you expect an organization or individual to guarantee what will or will not happen to something or someone in the future? Thanks.
Anything else?
Just waiting for any questions board members have for Mr. Brown.
Thanks, sir.
I just want to ask Mr. Brath one more time, just so that I'm clear about the use of groundwater at the school. Could you just make a statement on if we are using groundwater at the school?
We are not using any groundwater at the school.
Thank you. What are we using instead?
Public water supply.
And all the pipes are in.
And
We're
they
getting
are
in there.
And being installed and hooked up.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, for coming.
Thank you, Mr.
and
Brown.
Following up. Very thorough report.
Lots of tables, which I like to look at.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, the second item on our agenda today is an appointment for the board member to fill the vacancy of the District 5 seat. I know this was difficult for us in terms of the knowledge that we had to do that. I do want to remind you that on August 5th, the board voted to set the process for how we were going to do this. We were going to solicit applications from August 6th through August 20th. And the applications were going to come to me. Since then, I have received 5 applications, and I have shared them with all of you. Before I go any further in the appointment process, there's a couple of things I want to do. But one, I just want to thank all the 5 applicants who put their name forward. We're not filling Bruce's seat because that seat can never be filled. He is his own person and contributed in a way that only he could contribute. That's all I can say without losing it. So I will say, in my opinion, from reviewing the applications and from talking with the applicants, I was really excited about the caliber of the applicant pool. They each brought something very different. A different kind of voice. It would have been a different, each of them had qualifications and experiences that would have been beneficial. So it was a very diverse set of experiences that they each would have brought to the table. So it was not an easy task in front of us, or that we have in front of us right now. So I really want to thank those 5 people for stepping up and being willing to serve in that way, because I know from firsthand experience how important that is. So I do want to mention who the 5 were, and this is in alphabetical order. Margot Dracos, Susan Hudson, Frank McNeil Jr., Elizabeth Mofield, and John Weaver were the 5 applicants that we had received. So at this point, I am prepared to entertain nominations and vote who we will appoint to fill the seat. While I'm ready to proceed, our attorney has reminded me that we also have the option to table this and consider it at a future time to extend the time for application. So before I do that, I just want to make sure we're good to proceed and get consensus to proceed on the nomination process today.
Yes.
We have consensus on that? Okay, all right. So the way this works is that since there's consensus to proceed, we will now open the floor for nominations. And let me just remind you how this works. We do this the same way for our chair and vice chair process each year. We ask for someone here can nominate one of these 5 individuals to be our District 5 representative to appoint. We do not need a second for any of these nominations. And so what I'll do is I'll ask for nominations, and at some point we'll close the nominations. Depending on if we have more than one, if we go to 2 or 3, we'll have to use a ballot format. So that's the process, just so that we're all aware. Any questions before I proceed on the process? Okay. Do I hear any nominations for the appointment of a qualified applicant to fill out the unexpired term for District 5?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Dennison.
I'd like to make a few comments before I make my nomination. I had a one-on-one conversation with Margot Dracos last Friday for over an hour. And as a frame of reference for my comments, I have had hundreds, if not thousands, of hours interviewing. Margot has skills, talents, and experience that would serve Moore County schools well. She has excellent communication and time management skills, is goal-oriented, the skills of talent to work well with others, and a strong desire to serve children, especially those that are economically disadvantaged. She has had numerous experiences in founding and managing businesses and nonprofits, including being fiscally responsible for them. Skills and experiences utilizing technology for strategic planning, and she has a passion for the arts. In addition, she has a military spouse with 2 young children, and her husband is currently serving in Afghanistan. And I nominate Margot Drakus to fulfill the vacant seat in District 5 on the Moore County School Board.
Thank you, Mr. Dennison. Are there any other nominations?
I have.
Dr. Brown?
I'd like to make comments concerning John Weaver. Mr. Weaver has a variety of experiences in work and community services. Excuse me. He began his career in Carolina Power and Light Company and moved up the ladder to senior engineer with Duke Energy Progress. I can't ever get that right. Throughout his career, he has been involved in community activities such as the Planning Board for the Town of Southern Pines, Moore County United Way Board of Directors, and Southern Pines Parks and Recreation, just to name a few. He's also been involved in the High School Athletics Association and continues in the Southeast Athletic Officials Association. He's also the member of several local service organizations. He has 3 children who've gone through our schools and has 2 grandchildren in the area who will be attending Moore County schools. With his experience, I feel that he brings a piece that is somewhat lacking on our board right now, especially since Bruce is no longer here. His knowledge of the area for over 40 years, his background in construction and engineering, his working with children in the schools, and his work in the community offer us an opportunity to close this gap. His work as a volunteer with the Town of Southern Pines, the United Way, and Southern Pines Parks and Recreation demonstrate his caring for our community, his continued affiliation with the local service organizations, and the High School Athletics Association show his caring for our students. His experiences, his leadership, and knowledge seem to fill this gap that would help as we continue with construction on new schools, with redistricting Moore County schools, and with an operational knowledge of budgets. For this reason, I would like to nominate John N. Nelson for the District 5 seat for the Board of Education.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Weaver, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
John N. Weaver.
Weaver, yeah.
Are there any other nominations?
Madam Chair, move nominations to be closed.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, since we have more than one.
Madam Chair, it's not
Yes.
strictly necessary, but since a motion has been made to close the nominations, and it's been seconded, I would suggest you vote on that motion.
Oh,
before-
yes, thank you very much. There's a motion and a second to close the nominations. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried, 6-0. Thank you, Mr. Ramey. At this point, since we have more than one, Ms. Potter will send out, give us each a ballot. Please select,
Thank you, ma'am.
please write down the name of your individual that you would like to support. Don't forget, you have to sign these ballots.
Thank you.
This is so exciting.
So serious.
Moore County.
Madam Chair, the results of the election are 3 votes to 3, so that's
Oh.
a tie.
Well, that's
and no
fine.
person is elected. Under under Robert's rules, the normal procedure now would be to vote again, if the board is prepared to do that. You
Let's
can,
do
of
it
course,
again.
You do have the option to table this issue. This is not something that where action needs to be taken today, just as an FYI, but the board can also vote again.
I think we can try it
Majority
again.
will be obtained.
This is why it's good to have one more person.
Yeah. Neil, what if it comes up to be a tie again? How does that work?
Under Robert's rules, you vote until you have a majority, but this is not an issue that you need to take action on today. If at any point members feel it would be best to hit the pause button, we can have a motion to table and reconsider the item at a later meeting.
Oh, I'm not giving it to you.
Madam Chair, the results of this election are 4 votes for Mr. Weaver. That's a majority. So Mr. Weaver is appointed to the Board of Education, subject to his swearing in at a future date.
Thank you. I will give him and all the other candidates a call today out of respect to let them all know in case they're not watching. So thank you, board members, for your discernment and for taking the time to look at the applications. It'll be good to be back up to 7 board members again.
I'd like to reiterate that it was a very difficult choice. We had such good candidates, and I was very pleased that these people all stepped forward. So thank you again.
And I would like to say that I had an opportunity to speak to 4 of these applicants and had just great conversations and talked to them about some of the major initiatives that we are working on and got some insight from them, and they were right aligned with where we are and what we're doing. So just appreciate their willingness to submit their name for consideration.
Yeah, and I had some great conversations today. I called a few, and it was a very hard decision. So we're very lucky that we had who we had come up.
I was once told when I was younger, when I was debating over a decision, and someone said to me, "Be lucky that you have choices." And that's something I always remember. So, board members, there's time for comments. Anyone have comments?
I'm like you, I'm glad we are back to 7 strong and starting in our September board meeting. It will be good, as much as we miss Bruce.
No more comments.
On behalf of all the parents in Moore County, I'm glad we're back in school. And I hope that everyone has had a wonderful first day.
I don't have anything. We had a great last week with opening of our new school and kickoff celebrations, so it all led up to our day today, and hopefully everyone had a great day for the first day back.
Yeah, and I'd like to add the starfishes that we still have on our table. When that boy gave them to us, his mom was a teacher, and because of McDeed's Creek opening, she wanted to teach there. So we gained a teacher. She wasn't going to teach, and she said, "Oh, McDeed's Creek, I'm going for it." It was new. Her son was going there, so she is a new teacher there. And I just thought that was kind of neat because it kind of went full circle. So.
And I just want to reiterate just the thanks for all the staff for all the work that they have done over the past several weeks to get to today. From the Learning Institute, from the staff meetings, to the making sure that our new buildings and temporary buildings are ready. I'm just really excited for the school year ahead. And I just thought all the kickoff assemblies last week, it's just a lot of excitement to have an opportunity to see each and every single one of our staff and teachers all in each of those locations. It was really fun. It was fun. And hopefully that excitement will carry them through the opening school day jitters for today. So, all right, if nothing else,
Madam Chair, I move we adjourn the meeting.
is there a second? There's a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.